Imagine replacing your mailbox, not once, not twice, but 6 times, because the very people supposed to protect your neighborhood keep smashing it to pieces. That's exactly what happened to one black rancher, until he built a mailbox so tough it stopped the HOA patrol dead in their tracks. Literally. Make sure to hit that subscribe button and ring the bell. It started as what should have been the simplest thing in the world. Mail. On a wide stretch of ranch land where the grass met the horizon and the sun painted the sky orange each evening, his mailbox stood proudly at the edge of the road. To anyone else, it might have looked ordinary, maybe even forgettable, just a box on a post. But to him, it was much more. That mailbox was his lifeline. Out on the ranch, miles from the nearest post office, it carried everything he needed to stay connected. Bills that needed paying, parts he ordered for his tools, letters from cousins back in the city, and even catalogs he'd flip through while sipping coffee at dawn. It was a small but steady link between his quiet, self-sufficient life and the world beyond the dirt roads and cattle fences. But week after week, something strange kept happening. At first, he didn't think much of it. One night he heard a faint noise, like gravel crunching beneath tires, followed by a dull thud. He stepped outside the next morning and shook his head. His mailbox was lying face down in the dust. Its wooden post snapped clean in two. Maybe it was a reckless driver. He thought maybe some teenager swerving too close on the way home. Annoying, yes, but nothing worth losing sleep over. He replaced it. A new post, a new box, freshly painted black with shiny silver numbers. Problemsolved.org, so he thought. A few days later, just after midnight, the sound came again. Tires rolling slowly down the gravel road, headlights sweeping across his front field, and then, the crack of impact. He rushed outside, but by the time he reached the porch, the culprits were gone. What remained was all too familiar. The mailbox, twisted and broken, lying in pieces. This time, frustration crept in. Once might have been an accident, twice in the same week. That was no accident. Someone was out there, deliberately destroying his property. By the third time, suspicion turned into certainty. He had caught a glimpse in the dark SUV, its lights low, moving deliberately, like it was on a mission. And that's when he realized the most disturbing part. It wasn't kids. It wasn't strangers. It was the HOA's so-called patrol. Yes, the very people who claimed to protect the neighborhood, the ones who drove around with clipboards and smug expressions, checking paint colors and measuring lawn heights, were targeting him. The more he thought about it, the angrier he became. Why him? Why his mailbox? He started to connect the dots. The HOA had never liked him. Maybe it was because he didn't attend their endless meetings about lawn decorations. Maybe it was because his ranch, with its wide-open fields and barbed wire fences, didn't fit into their cookie-cutter idea of a neighborhood. Or maybe, just maybe, it was something uglier because he was different, because he didn't look like them, because he was a black rancher in a space they thought they controlled. Whatever the reason, it was deliberate. It was harassment. It wasn't going to stop. The pattern became predictable. Every few nights the same sound echoed across his land. Tires crunching, headlights sweeping, then the thud that made his stomach drop. He would step outside in the morning, already knowing what he'd see. Splintered wood, bent metal, and letters scattered in the dirt. At first he tried to laugh it off. He'd mutter to himself, "Guess I'll be building another one," as he hammered together new posts. But the joke wore thin quickly. Replacing a mailbox once was no big deal. Replacing it 4, 5, 6 times. That wasn't just cost, was exhausting. The mailbox wasn't just a box anymore. It had become a symbol. Each time they smashed it, they weren't just breaking wood and metal. They were sending him a message. You don't belong here. You don't get to feel safe here. We own this place, not you. And every time he stood in the dirt with a broken mailbox at his feet, he felt that message loud and clear. One night, instead of going to bed, he sat out on the porch, sipping coffee from a chipped mug, waiting in the dark. Sure enough, just past midnight, he saw the glow of headlights creeping down the road. The SUV slowed as it approached his mailbox. He could almost see the driver's smirk through the windshield. Then bam, the sound echoed across the ranch as the vehicle clipped the box and kept rolling. He clenched his jaw. This wasn't vandalism anymore. This was war. Neighbors started whispering, too. Some were sympathetic, telling him quietly, "Man, you're not going to win against them. That patrol's been like this for years. They pick someone and don't let go." Others avoided him altogether, afraid to get caught in the HOA's crosshairs. But he wasn't going to be intimidated. He wasn't going to move. This land had been in his family for generations, and no HOA bully in an SUV was going to drive him away. Every smashed mailbox only hardened his resolve. He knew one thing for certain: the next time they tried it, they weren't going to get away so easily. This wasn't just about mail anymore. This was about respect. This was about standing up to people who thought they could destroy what wasn't. This wasn't an accident. It was deliberate, and he was done letting it happen. The man tried to stay calm. He told himself not to overreact, not to jump to conclusions. After all, sometimes bad things just happen. A mailbox gets knocked down, you build it back up, and life goes on. So that's exactly what he did. He replaced the mailbox once. dug a new hole, set a new post, and fastened on a new box. Fresh paint, bold numbers, as if nothing had ever happened. He thought maybe that was the end of it. But just a few nights later, the sound returned, tires crunching, headlights sweeping across his land. Then, the same hollow thud. When he stepped outside the next morning, there it was, against splintered wood, bent metal. His mail scattered across the dirt like it had been thrown out with the trash. He sighed, shook his head, and rebuilt it again. And then again, by the third time, the frustration was boiling. It wasn't just about money or time anymore. It was about respect. Every replacement felt like an invitation for them to do it again, and sure enough, they did. The pattern was always the same late at night. When they thought nobody was watching, the patrol SUV would swerve, just enough to clip the mailbox and keep rolling. The man had hoped this was some kind of misunderstanding, that maybe the patrol didn't realize what they were doing, so he decided to bring it up directly, to be civil, to talk it out. One evening, he attended the HOA board meeting. He walked in with photos of the smashed mailbox, receipts from all the replacements, and a calm determination to settle things like neighbors. He explained the situation, laid out the facts, and asked for help. What he got in return was nothing short of infuriating. Smirks, shrugs, excuses. One board member leaned back in his chair and said, "Maybe your mailbox was too close to the road." Another chimed in, "You could always move it back a few feet." And another simply chuckled, "Accidents happen. Maybe you're overthinking this." Accidents overthinking. He had photos, proof, and witnesses who had heard the crashes in the night, but to the board, none of it mattered. They weren't interested in fixing the problem. They weren't interested in fairness. Their message was clear. They didn't respect him, and they didn't plan to stop. Walking out of that meeting, he felt the weight of it all settle on his shoulders. It wasn't just a broken mailbox anymore. It was open hostility. It was deliberate harassment. And he wasn't the only one who noticed. Neighbors whispered about it in hushed tones. Some offered quiet sympathy, afraid to say too much. One man told him, "You're not going to win against them. The HOA does what it wants." Another neighbor warned him, "They've been like this for years. They pick a target, wear them down, make their life so miserable, they eventually pack up and leave." The stories piled up: residents who were fined for flower beds being too tall, families harassed for leaving their trash can out an hour late, older folks bullied into selling their homes because they couldn't keep up with the endless, petty rules. The HOA's patrol wasn't there to protect anyone. They were there to intimidate, to control, to remind people who was really in charge. But this man was different. He wasn't about to be bullied. Not here. Not on this land. This ranch had been in his family for generations. His grandfather had built the house with his own 2 hands. His father had worked the soil and raised cattle that fed the community. Every fence post, every tree, every acre of that land carried history and sacrifice. And he was determined to honor that legacy. No HOA patrol in a shiny SUV was going to scare him off. No smug board member was going to erase his roots. This wasn't just property, it was home. It was identity. It was family. Every smashed mailbox was meant to weaken him, but instead, each one only made him stronger. Each time he saw his mail scattered in the dirt, it only hardened his resolve. He wasn't going anywhere. He wasn't going to bend. And he sure wasn't going to let the HOA think they had one if they wanted to fight. They'd picked the wrong man, because this rancher wasn't about to be pushed off his land by anybody, not now. Not ever. That's when he made a decision. If they wanted a war over a mailbox, then a war they would get, but it wouldn't be the kind of war the HOA expected. He wasn't going to shout at meetings, beg for fairness, or waste his breath on arguments that would fall on deaf ears. He wasn't even going to call the cops because by now, he knew better. The patrol was the problem, and the board that backed them would never hold them accountable. No. This was going to be different. This was going to be smarter. He decided that if they were determined to destroy his mailbox, then he would build one that couldn't be destroyed. For the next few days, he kept to himself, quiet but focused. He sketched on scraps of paper, calculating angles and weight. He dug through his shed, pulling out tools and materials he hadn't touched in years. This wasn't just a repair job anymore, it was a project. A mission. When the weekend came, he got to work. The first step was the foundation. He dug deep, far deeper than any regular Sweat poured down his face as he shoveled through the dry ranch soil, making sure the hole was wide enough and strong enough to hold what he had in mind. Then came the cement. Bag after bag, he mixed and poured, filling the hole until it was solid, immovable, and as strong as stone. By the time it set, that foundation wasn't going anywhere. Next came the post itself. But this wasn't wood, not this time. This was solid steel, heavy, thick, and strong enough to hold up a highway. He welded the joints tight, sparks flying into the night. The sound of grinding metal echoed down the road, and soon, neighbors began to notice. Pickup trucks slowed as they passed by, headlights lingering. Folks rolled down their windows and called out, "What are you building out there?" He just smiled and waved them on. Let them wonder, let the rumors spread. But the truth was simple. He wasn't just building a mailbox. He was building a fortress. By Sunday afternoon, the structure was nearly complete. He welded a reinforced box, lining it with layers of metal that no bumper could crush. He bolted the box securely to the steel post, every connection sealed and reinforced. To anyone passing by, it looked like an ordinary mailbox. Black paint, rustic wood trim, shiny new numbers. Nothing flashy, nothing suspicious. That was the genius of it. On the outside, it blended right in. Just another mailbox on just another ranch. But inside it was indestructible. It was the kind of mailbox you'd only understand once you hit it. And that was exactly the point. He took a step back and admired his work. It stood there, tall and unyielding, rooted deep in the earth like it had always belonged. A quiet smile spread across his face. For the first time in weeks, he felt peace. Not because the problem was solved, but because he knew the next move wasn't his dot. The next move belonged to them. Word traveled quickly around the neighborhood. Some neighbors whispered, "He's finally had enough." Others laughed nervously, wondering if the HOA would retaliate. But most people just stayed quiet, waiting to see what would happen next. And oh, something was going to happen. Because here's the thing about people who bully, they don't stop on their own. They keep pushing until they meet resistance. And for weeks, the patrol had grown cocky, thinking they could smash his mailbox whenever they pleased. But the next time they tried it, they were in for a shock. This wasn't just a mailbox anymore. This was a test. This was a trap. This was the moment when the game would finally change, and he was ready for it. He didn't need to yell. He didn't need to fight. He didn't need to beg anyone to take him seriously. He just had to wait. Because sooner or later, the HOA patrol would come rolling down that road again. Sooner or later, they'd line up their SUV with his mailbox, grinning like they always did, expecting another easy victory. But when they hit it this time, they wouldn't be laughing. They'd be the ones left broken, and his mailbox would still be standing tall. For the first time in a long time, he felt like the playing field had shifted. He wasn't just reacting anymore. He wasn't just replacing what they destroyed. He was one step ahead. And in a fight against bullies, that's exactly where you want to be. A week later, it finally happened. It was just past midnight. The ranch cloaked in silence except for the faint rustle of wind through the trees. The sky was black and starless, and the dirt road stretched like a pale ribbon in the dark. The rancher sat quietly on his porch, a steaming cup of coffee in his hand. He wasn't jittery or restless. He was calm, patient, waiting. Because he knew. He knew they couldn't resist. He knew the patrol would come. He knew their arrogance was too strong, their routine too predictable. They had gotten away with it for weeks, laughing in their SUVs, telling themselves they were untouchable. To them, smashing his mailbox had become sport, tradition, a little game of power they thought they had already won. But tonight, the game would change. The distant hum of an engine broke the quiet. His eyes lifted, their two beams of headlights, glowing faintly in the dark, growing brighter as they approached. The patrol SUV, right on time. He set his mug down on the porch railing and leaned back in his chair, watching the SUV barreled down the road, tires grinding against gravel, dust trailing behind it like smoke. The driver shifted slightly, angling the vehicle toward the mailbox. He could almost picture the smirk on the man's face, the little thrill he felt in lining up his target. They thought they were about to break him again. Instead, they were driving straight into a trap. With a sudden wham, the front bumper slammed into the mailbox. The sound wasn't the usual dull thud of wood splintering. No, this was different. It was violent, metallic, a sound that split the night like thunder. The SUV jerked violently, almost as if it had hit a brick wall. Metal screamed, glass shattered. The hood crumpled like paper. The radiator hissed, spewing steam into the air. The airbags exploded open, with a deafening pop, slamming into the faces of the patrol officers inside, and the mailbox. Not even a scratch. It stood tall, unyielding, rooted in concrete and steel, mocking the wrecked SUV that now sat crippled against it. From his porch, the rancher calmly picked up his coffee again, the steam rising lazily into the cool night air. He didn't cheer. He didn't gloat. He just shook his head slowly, almost pitying them, because in that single crash, everything had changed. The patrol's arrogance had finally caught up with them. The SUV doors creaked open, and the officers stumbled out, dazed and furious. One clutched his shoulder, the other cursed under his breath, kicking the dirt. They looked at the mailbox, at the wrecked front end of their patrol vehicle, and then at the rancher sitting quietly on his porch, and there was nothing they could do. They couldn't accuse him of sabotage. His mailbox was legal, firmly within county code. They couldn't charge him with destruction of property because it wasn't his property that was destroyed, it was theirs. They had destroyed themselves. For the first time, the power wasn't in their hands, it was in his dot. The patrol scrambled, back to their SUV, trying desperately to start the engine. But the radiator leaked, the hood was bent, and the front wheels were knocked out of alignment. The vehicle groaned, sputtered, then went silent. Dead. Stranded. The rancher took another sip of his coffee. He didn't move, didn't offer help, didn't say a word. He just let the silence do the talking. Word spread fast the next morning. By dawn, neighbors were already whispering about it. By noon, everyone knew. The story traveled from porch to porch, from text to text. The patrol smashed their SUV into his mailbox and lost. They thought they could bully him forever, but he beat them with a mailbox. They got wrecked, and he didn't even have to lift a finger. The humiliation was complete. The HOA patrol, the self-appointed enforcers of rules and intimidation, been beaten by the very man they'd tried to grind down, beaten not by violence, not by lawsuits, but by something as simple as steel, concrete, and patience. Neighbors who had once been too afraid to speak out suddenly felt emboldened. They chuckled behind closed doors, shaking their heads at the irony. The mighty patrol, undone by a mailbox. The bullies, embarrassed in front of the very community they'd tried to control. For weeks, they had laughed at the rancher, sneering every time they smashed his box. But now, the laughter was gone. Their authority was shattered. Their reputation lay in the dirt, crumpled like the hood of their SUV, and the mailbox. Still standing, still waiting, a monument to quiet defiance. The rancher didn't need to boast. He didn't need to rub it in. Everyone saw what had happened, and everyone understood the message. You can push a man only so far. You can bully, harass, and intimidate, but eventually, you'll hit something you can't break. And when that happens, it's not the man who loses, it's you. The HOA board tried to fight back. Of course, they couldn't stand the humiliation. The patrol had been embarrassed in front of the entire neighborhood, and now the board needed to reassert their authority. At the next meeting, they launched into their accusations. They claimed his mailbox was too dangerous, that it was a safety hazard, that had violated some vague line in the community guidelines. They spoke with false confidence, waving papers around as if they could bluff their way into victory. But the rancher was ready. He walked in calm, steady, holding a folder full of documents. County regulations, official postal guidelines, photos of mailboxes across the state built the exact same way. One by one, he laid them out on the table. His message was clear. My mailbox is legal. Your patrol destroyed your own SUV. The problem isn't my mailbox. It's your abuse of power. The board members shifted uncomfortably in their seats. Their smirks were gone. Their voices grew quieter, because deep down, they knew he was right. And, for the first time, they weren't the ones holding the power. Outside those meetings, something else was happening, something the HOA didn't expect. Neighbors who had once stayed silent began speaking up. Why are we paying for patrols that harass us? One asked at a community gathering. Who gave them the right to destroy property? Another demanded. Why are we wasting money fixing their SUV instead of fixing potholes? The questions spread, louder and sharper each time. The board, usually so quick to boast about their control, suddenly had no answers. Their intimidation had backfired. The rancher had become a symbol not just for himself, but for everyone who had felt bullied or silenced by the HOA. People pointed to that mailbox as proof that the board wasn't invincible, that their rules could be challenged, that their power wasn't absolute. The HOA, realizing their grip was slipping, finally backed down. They stopped sending patrols past his property. They stopped targeting his land. They dropped their accusations, hoping the whole incident would fade from memory. But it didn't fade. That mailbox still stands today, tall and unyielding, a symbol of quiet defiance. To the rancher, it isn't just about steel, concrete, or mail. It's about dignity. It's about drawing a line in the sand and saying, this far, no further. He didn't just win back his mailbox, he won back his respect. He showed the HOA that intimidation has limits, that you can't bully someone forever without consequences. And he proved something even bigger. Sometimes the strongest stand doesn't come from shouting, fighting, or endless arguments. Sometimes, it comes from building something so solid, so unshakable, that no one can tear it down. And that's the lesson his story leaves behind. So the next time someone tries to push you around, remember this rancher. You don't always have to meet force with force. You don't always have to argue louder or fight harder. Sometimes, all it takes is patience, strategy, and the courage to build something they'll never see coming. Because when bullies finally crash headfirst into the wall you've built, just like that patrol SUV against the mailbox, it won't be you left broken, that'll be them.